Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Cut and Splice. This is Matt.
This is Jason.
This is Gil.
This time around, we're going to be talking about movie presentation formats. Just a short background. I am a bit of a projectionist. I worked 1570 IMAX projection at a multiplex for a few years way back when. I also worked 1570 IMAX for Dunkirk a few years ago, and I'm going to be returning to the booth happily for Oppenheimer from July 15th through August. And we thought that it would be prudent to discuss presentation formats and how things have evolved through time, the good and the bad, the ugly, and you know, fundamentally what works and what doesn't, and why we even strive to get better in that aspect of cinema. So I guess I'll just kick it off to you two to um, interject, and I'll shut up for a couple of seconds.
What I'm
Only
actually
a couple
curious
of
about,
seconds? No.
yeah, a couple seconds. I'm curious about because you mentioned about the today online about the length of Oppenheimer because it's close to 3 hours.
Yeah.
In situations that it's more than one reel in IMAX, do they have a way to switch reels, or does it have to be some sort of like
It's a platter system.
it's a platter system? Yeah, so
So
Yeah.
not really, no.
not really. So did they think? I wonder if they thought about that when they figured out the length.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually something that me and my confirmed second or first, however you want to put it, in Buford have already been talking about, like, how we're going to deal with that. Um, I ran projection on The Hobbit, and that was 2 hours and 49 minutes. And the largest platter that we had, uh, The Hobbit was running to the very, very edge of it. And so, like, the brackets that we were using, needed to, go through the bottom. We were like, we were right at the precipice. So, um, uh, yeah, if Oppenheimer is 2 hours and 49 minutes or slightly longer than that, it's going to be the same thing. Only it'll be easier than The Hobbit because it's only 2D. So, we only have to do it once. The Hobbit was 3D, so we had to do it twice. The two prints, right eye, left eye, all that junk. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be manageable, but yeah, I mean, that is a fundamental limitation to 1570 IMAX projection, is that since it is a platter system, uh, yeah, you can't make a 4-hour movie, or I mean, technically even a 3-hour movie, and have it work with the physical technology. So yeah,
And I
So
guess go ahead.
before we go any further, since I was so um, enamored with Matt's interesting um, uh, credentials that he listed at the beginning, I'm going to go ahead and just mention the fact that prior to Matt's experience as a IMAX projectionist, I also worked for a little over a year as a 35 millimeter film projectionist, working on Christie projectors for
yeah,
Regal, um, which obviously isn't as impressive. But I just wanted to throw that out there that I did all that before Matt. and he just kind of like followed my lead. Is what I'm saying.
Yes, that's a good thing to point out. Yeah.
I'm just joking, but all of that is accurate except for the last part.
But we're both educated
I guess I don't know. Anyway,
in this area.
yeah, sure. I mean, nowadays they're you don't really even use film prints anymore, so it's all kind of like a vestigial knowledge at this point, sadly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Oppenheimer was shot exclusively on IMAX, right? This time.
To my understanding, it's a mixture of IMAX and 70 millimeter.
Oh, also
Standard 70.
like
So
Dunkirk type.
yeah. I mean, I mean, no matter how great Christopher Nolan has been with the IMAX format, I mean, it's just impractical to shoot an entire movie on IMAX because the cameras are just too loud. I mean, you really just can't shoot dialogue with them. So, yeah, to my understanding, it's similar to Dunkirk in that most there's a lot of IMAX footage, but like dialogue sequences and everything like that, most of that is shot on 70 for the audience. The difference between IMAX and standard 70 is that IMAX is run horizontally through the camera and it's 15 perforations wide. So, like those little sprocket holes that you think about in on your film, it's 15 sprocket holes wide when it's running through the camera, and it also doesn't have an optical sound strip when you actually print it. Standard 70 is 5 sprocket holes tall. It's run vertically through the camera.
Like a traditional projector or
Right.
camera.
Right. So when they're making an IMAX print, everything's still running horizontally, but they're going to do a mishmash of the standard 70 that's going to be cropped and letterboxed, and then the IMAX, the native IMAX footage is going to take up the entire screen. But yeah,
To give a visual,
yeah,
when you're looking at a traditional movie at a movie theater or before everything went digital, and the film is being projected in your normal 35 millimeter film prints, every single cell, every single image that you're seeing, if you were to cut it out of the film and look at it, it's about the size of a thumbprint, more or less. Whereas an IMAX cell is about the size of your palm almost.
yeah,
And I know how big a 70 is. I just can't think of an example. I guess it's about halfway in between, but I can't think of an object that's about that size.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good illustration. But yeah, yeah, I think that's basically a good way to think about it. It's I mean, if you saw Dunkirk, you have kind of a baseline of what's going on with Oppenheimer, but the difference with Oppenheimer is they actually shot a large portion of it on black and white film, and that's never been done before in terms of 70 millimeter. I mean,
70
so
millimeter black and white.
yeah. So
Like there was
this is
a black and white stock, like it wasn't in the DI.
uh, Christopher Nolan has never used a DI in his life, and I don't think he ever will.
Oh, okay. No, I'm just
Yeah,
curious because I don't know if they have like black and white 70 millimeter.
yeah,
Like I guess you
no,
can make it, yeah, for
yeah,
specifically for him.
yeah. No, they actually use black and white stock
Must be
for
good
it.
to be Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, this is, I mean, one of the honors of being one of the I think 69 projectionists in the world actually working on this thing is that it's probably the first and last time that this is ever going to happen exactly the way that it's happening. It's I mean, they just don't do that, you know. And you know, I mean, you know, Hoyt van Hoytma brought this up back with Interstellar, you know, using when he was talking about using IMAX to, you know, shoot close-ups and how much it's like, you know, shooting large format portraits. And since I got into 4x5 photography again recently, I mean, the more I'm realizing that he's right. It's just so clean and clear and uh, sharp and gorgeous in every and not in like an artificial digital way. It's
I was gonna
organic.
say,
Yeah,
'cause everything you're saying sounds very digital, but
yeah,
yeah,
right,
it
right.
still has that silo
That
cellular
that je ne sais quoi.
analog
Yeah,
quality. Yeah, there's just something about film, and I guess we shouldn't get stuck on it too much because we want to talk presentation in general, but there is something to analog that just no matter how much like uh, contrast ratio you have on digital cameras, like the fact that it's zeros and ones versus analog that has a gradual gradation, it's just very tough to match. It's just a different type of like technology essentially. And
yeah,
even though it gets very very close and most people don't even know the difference, if you put it side by side, you know, you can kind of tell it's mild, but it's there.
yeah. Oh, and you know, you know, this is the conversation that I've been having for more than a decade now. Is, you know, like, you know, how many people can actually tell, and why does it matter? And I mean, it's not it's not an issue of like the general public noticing. I mean, it's our job to notice. That is our job. Like, if we don't understand the difference, if we can't see the difference, we don't deserve to have jobs in this industry. We are the ones who are supposed to notice the finite details so that other people don't have
Hmm.
to notice the finite details. That's what we're supposed to do. So, I mean, you know, whenever anybody tells me, like, you know, oh, well, why not just shoot it digitally? Why not just project it digitally? Why not just do this because it's easier because nobody's going to tell? It's like, well, no, fuck you. I'm supposed to tell. I can tell. And if I can tell, then I mean that yeah, that's my entire job. That is literally everything that we're supposed to do is pay attention to details.
Pretentious.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
think the
totally
way
agree with you, Matt. 100%. I agree with everything you just said.
the way I look at it is if Roger Deakins basically says that he can't tell anymore what's shot on film and whatnot, what is, then I don't think it matters if anybody else can tell, really. That's the way I look at it. But again,
I
it's a preference. If you're a filmmaker and you want to shoot film because it's got a certain, and then you play deep into a lot of people nowadays, and we've had this discussion before, play into the grain and into that, especially for like period pieces. I totally understand, but for the general thing, the technology has caught up. Most people, including some cinematographers, don't really notice, including some master cinematographers, like can't tell the difference. So it's a sign that the technology is good enough. But yeah, should we give up on film? I definitely agree. We shouldn't give up on it. It should be part of the toolbox, like anything else. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we kind of digressed into capture
Yeah,
formats.
yeah, exactly. We're mostly
Uh,
talking about like the problem. I guess we can make this about these filmmakers, like, and we've brought up when we discussed this subject is like whether it's Nolan, that's all these filmmakers that are being stubborn about sticking to film because there's something so horrible about digital, like Nolan, Tarantino, Spielberg, that only did the BFG because it was a kids movie, so that was like a pass, stupid. Um, but yeah, these Puritans of sorts, and then not only that, also Paul Thomas Anderson, which all of them I love as filmmakers, and I don't, not against them shooting on film. I just think that their anti-digital stance is a bit extreme. But there was this movement of starting to shoot on 70 because like, oh, you think your digital image is sharp, just see how sharp I can make my image, and then and then Tarantino shot as claustrophobic, Western. Makes no sense to shoot on 70. He shot it on 70, but fine, he wanted to do it. That's all good. At least he had some outdoor scenes in the beginning, and I think towards the end.
I think just the
But
beginning.
what?
I feel
Mostly
I,
the beginning.
I think it was just the
Yeah,
beginning, and then
yeah,
the flashback.
yeah.
yeah.
But in any case, I think that and then they came off of that. I think Paul Thomas Anderson just got back to just shooting normal 35, which, and Spielberg as well. Spielberg didn't do any 70 or anything crazy, but he's still sticking to 35. Again, I'm fine with all of it, and I like some of the things that they've been doing. Like I think I mentioned at some point on the podcast that I when I went to see well, for one thing, Licorice Pizza. When I went to see that, they had like a pinball machine and stuff like, it's kind of like a sort of like 80s theme or whatever, the 70s actually. Sorry, it was 70s or 60s. I forget when the movie was. I think it was like early 70s. But like when pinballs got legal and big, so they had like the theme outside of the movie, like in the Landmark, which now closed down, unfortunately.
Oh,
Um,
Oh,
and then also when I went to see in the Landmark too, when I saw Phantom Menace, Phantom Thread,
I
also
was gonna say I don't even think
yeah,
Landmark was the landmark when that came out.
yeah, no, Phantom Menace was like I saw back in Israel. But no, Phantom Thread, a much better movie. Um, they had like a thing, a brochure that had all the designs, the costume designs from the movie and stuff as a souvenir of sorts. So I like those touches, and then maybe you guys can talk to the what was the road show thing for
the
Yeah,
Hateful Eight.
Hateful Eight.
Yeah,
that was a good one. That was also the landmark, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
guess the Landmark
I,
was big on
I
that
thought
back then.
I mean, I saw it twice.
no, I
So
know, but when you and I went,
yeah, I think that was the Landmark, and yeah, the first time I saw it, it was in DC, and then I
so
saw it with you in LA,
before
right?
we go into the yes, correct. Before we go into the details, because we will talk about what they did for that, I just wanted to say as a blanket statement, if you're a movie lover, like a real movie lover, and you don't live in LA, you're really missing out. I'm just going to say that plain and simple because between the New Beverly, the American Cinematheque theaters, the ArcLight theaters that used to exist, and the Landmark theater that used to exist. So I'm basically talking about in the past now at this point, because the lockdowns kind of killed everything. But prior to that, when in let's just say in the last 15 years to 20 years or so, there are at least those four theater, either theaters or theater companies in LA that offered fantastic movie going experiences that were unlike the garbage you see at other theaters that claim to be luxury theaters or claim to be artistic, like art house theaters or something like that. Not just what we were just about to talk about with the roadshow, like you were just saying, they'd have like stuff in the lobby and brochures. Just to give an example, what Matt was just saying, when The Hateful Eight came out for Tarantino's movie, they had a version called the Roadshow, which was something he was touring all over the country with, I believe. And it was like, help me out here, Matt. It was you got to see a longer cut of the movie, right? Like 20 extra minutes or something like that.
Yeah, I believe so. And
you got to have a brochure that they would give you that had a bunch of cool information in it, pictures, things like that. You got an intermission and an overture at the beginning. And there may have been some stuff out in the lobby. I don't remember on that one. But overall, just like really bang for your buck kind of stuff, fantastic stuff. And then that's without even going into all the other stuff about the Landmark that was made it such a great theater to go to.
Yeah, they had often the costumes from certain movies in the lobby and stuff.
Similar to the Landmark, probably their best competition, I would say, would be the better ArcLight theaters. Once ArcLight started popping up all over LA, they did kind of start having some watered down theaters locations, in my opinion. But the really good ones, like the original one, the Dome, which I hear is coming back at some point, as well as some of their other better ones like the Sharklight, which is the Sherman Oaks ArcLight, and a couple other ones that were really nice. They would often have costumes in big glass displays in the lobby. When Wreck-It Ralph came out, I remember they had 4 classic arcade games in the lobby, so you could play like Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, and probably Galaga or something like that. And then there was an actual Fix-It Felix, which is the game that Wreck-It Ralph is from, in the lobby. So you could play that. That was really fun and cool. That's the kind of stuff that ArcLight would do. Also, both of those, ArcLight and Landmark, had like bars and restaurants in them. So you could get like food, like actual real food. That was always cool.
Yeah. Drinks.
Yeah, especially drinks. Oh my gosh, 21 and over screens. If you've never
not to mention also movie themed drinks like cocktails often.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. But just throwing this out there, if you live in a flyover state, and I don't mean this to be mean, I mean it, I'm genuine sympathy. If you don't know what it's like to go out on a Friday night and be able to go to a 21 and over screening of a movie that you really want to see, just knowing full well that you can get a beer and sit down in your movie theater and have no children or teenagers or anyone who's going to ruin this. I'm telling you right now, I miss it. I miss it so much. It's anyway. And then what? I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the great stuff we got to see at the Cinematheque locations. I mean, obviously one that jumps to mind is like any of the Q&As we got to see, with where they would have the filmmakers or actors show up, for the for 2 different movies that they were in or something like that. These little programs they put together.
I mean, that's definitely one of the big thing about living in LA, that it's, and I'm sure this happens also in other places,
sure,
especially festivals and stuff, but there's no place that it happens as often as LA, because essentially everybody lives here, so they just pop in. Like there's so many instances of like Mel Brooks popped in for a double feature of like his movies and
Yeah.
like even unplanned stuff. You know, the time and we've mentioned this in the podcast, like the time that we
Say it again. Say it again.
that we got to see the a surprise like early showing of The Master
Yeah.
on 70 millimeter because they're like essentially like testing it out in a way on us. um, and you know, things like that are and then the Q&As for sure. Midnight screenings too. Midnight
Yeah.
screenings are really fun. I really
Especially
wish
at
I
New
was
Beverly.
young again and could do more of those.
You just have to prioritize the movies over your children. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
I go to the movies alone like 3 times a week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if I were to like not have anybody around and not have a family to occupy me, I could develop that habit. I'm not against
Yeah,
it. It's just
if
that
you were
most of my
lonely,
life I was always with somebody or had friends around, so I just always leaned into that. It's always a very you know,
Yeah.
it is a social you know, experience.
In case our viewers are not picking up on this, in other words, what we're saying is that Gil is just less of a loser than Matt and I.
yes.
I just live a different lifestyle. I mean, I wish I had more time, but I know that there's I do this for a good reason, hopefully to raise more humans to continue the species.
Oh, you never know. One of your children might
Well,
eventually be like a major successful filmmaker. Then you'll have
well,
not just contributed to the species,
I-
you'll have
knows? That's
we
contributed to the
definitely
art form.
that's the dream
we
of every
definitely
father,
need
I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
we definitely need more Jews. So yeah,
Yeah,
keep
exactly. Especially
working on
Jews.
that.
Not that I disagree, but that's odd that that's where you went with that.
Yeah, I'm a Jew supremacist, and
But what Matt
I'm just
means
a
is
white
we
guy.
need more literate people.
Yeah,
The Jews are very literate. It comes
Oh
from the
my
whole Bible tradition.
God. I was just going to say, pulling us back on track of what we were talking about. You were mentioning, Gil, and I know we've talked about this before, but specifically the New Beverly midnight screenings really were like unlike anything else, that we, I mean, at least I thought so, especially the really good ones that we went to, like, Demolition Man. And I mean, it's not like they did any huge giant production like we're talking about, the kinds of stuff like having stuff in the lobby or anything like that. But usually they would try to have somebody there, like someone who worked on the movie or something. I think they had somebody there who was trying to tell us how the three seashell things worked or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and more so, I think the New Beverly is the crowd. The crowd was the
It's the crowd.
attraction.
Yes.
Is that the crowd was
Yeah.
so like you see Barry Lyndon there, and the crowd is cracking up every other scene, and it just really adds to the atmosphere because it's not as if it's disruptive in any way. It's just like
No.
you're among. This is what really people talk about with the communal experience, which I don't think really applies to most movie theaters. But in the New Beverly, when you watch a movie, you know that everybody's around you is a big movie buff. So
Yeah.
you're kind of like you're with your own people, like really, like truly your own people.
I would argue that every movie going experience has the potential to be something like that. The only problem is it's not that there's something super unique about the New Beverly and the people who go there. It's more like who doesn't go there. That's really what it is. It's not that going to a different movie theater, like a regular Regal or AMC or something like that, you're not going to be in a room full of people who, a bunch of other people in the room who are just as passionate about the movie as you are. It's that at least half, if not unfortunately more often, you end up with a bunch of the people there who are just there to pass the time, and they're ruining the movie experience for you. It's the fact that going to a theater like that cuts all that out. That's what makes it so awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so I think overall there's definitely something about the theatrical And of all the arguments that I've heard recently, I heard, I think Bill Maher was arguing with Christoph Waltz on his show. He was like saying like, Christoph Waltz is like, well, when you go to the theater, you can't really turn it off and start again. You're really there. You have to like see it. And Bill Maher is like, yeah, but I mean, I read a book and I don't read in one sitting. I stop and I start again. What's the problem with that? And Christoph Waltz is like, oh, okay, that's true. Yeah, I guess. He just kind of
Well,
gave up. But
I mean,
I
that's
think
very kind of Christoph Waltz to be
no, it's
so.
just he was
Yeah.
just kind of going along with it as some sort of a joke. That is a good point, and this is the way that I watch movies nowadays because of lack of time. I watch it in 2-3 sittings because I just have 30-40 increments of time. I just don't have more than that. But I do think that it's a good point. That I think that's what's unique about the movie theater. The two biggest things I would say, it's not the image, because I have a projector at home, and even if you have a big screen TV, that's probably adequate if you're close enough to it. It's more so I feel like sound. I don't think you can ever get the same type of sound, the booming sound that you get in a movie theater at home. You just can't. If you have neighbors, if you have kids sleeping, you just can't. You just can't make it that booming. And then the fact that you are strapped in. The only downside being that you can't pause the movie to pee. If only there are like intermissions, I think the theatrical experience would be great. Like to me, it really bothers me the fact that I can't drink too much in the first half of the movie because I'm afraid I would have to like miss some of it just to go pee. That's the only thing that frustrates me about the theatrical experience. But other than that, I like the fact that you're strapped in and you can't look away. You have to stick with it. You can't pause it. Just it would be nice if there was like an intermission.
I think that if there are any like regular listeners, that I would hope that by now our communal feelings on how pro intermission we are on this podcast have been well documented.
Yeah.
It's just come out that apparently Oppenheimer is Christopher Nolan's words, kissing 3 hours. So
Will there be
first
an
of all,
intermission?
not to my understanding, no.
Damn.
So I worked on The Hobbit like way back when, and that was 2 hours and 49 minutes, and that was running to the end of our platters. So uh Oppenheimer kissing 3 hours is going to be like, holy crap, we're going to the edge of what we're capable of doing.
Quite literally.
In terms of IMAX projection, but
It's good that you're bringing back The Hobbit because I was gonna say before we wrap things up, we should maybe especially get Matt's comments on this, on because other types of presentations in recent years that became like popular amongst filmmakers are things like James
3D.
Cameron with the 3D, and then of course Peter Jackson when he did the whole 60 frame or 48 frame, like presentation, which I didn't see, but I don't know what Matt you thought about it. I know your feelings about it, but if you can expand on it.
Okay. Oh, one of the big things with The Hobbit, and I can speak to this with experience, is that when we were running it in IMAX, we actually got a lot of complaints, and it was because it was shot at 48 frames per second. And when we were presenting it in IMAX, we had to show it in 24 frames per second. So it had motion jolts, like it didn't look right. And so we actually had to refund a lot of people and put them into HFR theaters, high frame rate theaters
Wow.
because they didn't like the motion effect that transferred from the high frame rate capture to the lower frame rate presentation. And that was a major pain in the ass, and something that I would rather not have to deal with ever.
Yeah, that is pretty stupid that they I mean they should have just not shown it on IMAX if it was not
Yeah.
capable of.
Yeah, dollar signs matter, and
I
they
guess
could.
some people didn't ask for a refund, so they took that risk.
I guess.
Yeah.
Real quickly, I was just going to say there was two other little ones I wanted to toss out because we were talking about these interesting experiences in presentation, experiments and whatever you want to call it. Just recently, I went to see the Empire Strikes Back in concert. That's how they would say it. But that was kind of interesting. It was just like seeing the movie, really, but there was like a live orchestra there, kind of like what you'd have like for a stage play almost. You'd have like a live orchestra sometimes. Same sort of thing. It was definitely an interesting experience, but it's odd in a sense because I feel like the mix is off, because like obviously you're kind of there because of the live music. So I don't know if it was intentional or if there's just something they couldn't help, but like during scenes when there's like background music and dialogue going on, it was like sometimes I was like, wow, I'm glad I've seen this movie 800 times because they're really favoring the music over the dialogue here.
Yeah, it's
But
definitely for people who watch the movie.
absolutely, and that's why I don't think you ever see that for anything other than the classics.
Yeah.
But it was still cool. It was really cool to see, and it was fun. A little odd because it was in a giant hockey arena, so like you're on folding chairs and stuff rather than comfortable movie theater chairs. But yeah, it was cool.
I did 2001 at the Hollywood Bowl with the
Oh,
orchestra. That was pretty fun. Yeah, and that movie doesn't have too much dialogue. It's a lot of music. But
that would be a really good one to do. Yeah, for that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I've
I
never
actually
done one.
saw they have a Return of the Jedi one coming up in the Hollywood Bowl, and I was because we were looking at the schedule because Diana wanted to go to something, and I was like, I would go to that. That movie is like pretty much like 75% climax, so it would lend itself well to a lot of music.
Yeah. One thing I've never done myself, but I see pictures of it all the time. Is like, let me rephrase it. One thing I have done that's a different kind of presentation thing that I would recommend to people if they get a chance. A lot of cities, especially LA, have these like summer movie in the park type things. And those can be a lot of fun, especially if they do a good job, like making a big presentation out of it. The ones I used to go to had often would bring actors from the movie in, and they would have like a band playing for 15 minutes beforehand or something like that. And it was really cool.
Oh yeah,
Good
and then
experience.
food trucks and stuff.
Food trucks, that's a really big part of it. That's really fun. But I was going to say, along that same vein, one that I've never done before is when they use those same outdoor projectors and have these big giant projection screens. I always thought it'd be really cool to see Jaws on a lake. They have these things where you can either be in a little boat or floating in an inner tube for 2 hours. So you're like literally wet in water in a lake watching Jaws. And there's a lot of people who are like, no way in hell.
They should
Like,
do
I'm
that
not going to
while
do it.
being high, and then the
Yeah.
paranoia would set in.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I've always thought that'd be a lot of fun, especially since it's a phenomenal movie. But and it's it would add to the terror factor.
Yeah.
It is a weird thing when you think about this, like from a strictly technological perspective. I'm going to Steelman, the digital side, where like John Schwartzman was talking about how he was shooting tests for Jurassic World, and he shot everything on 35 millimeter anamorphic, and he showed all of the tests to like the producers and everything like that, with prints struck from the negative, and compared them to digital, and everybody said, oh well, yeah, we prefer the 35 millimeter anamorphic prints. And like, I mean, of course they do, because like, you're striking it from the original negative. And it kind of goes back to what Jason said about like, if you're in LA, you're missing out. And it's just one of those things where like, I I am entirely sure that John Schwartzman is telling the truth, that all these guys said, yeah, we would rather see the print struck from the original 35 millimeter anamorphic negative, and not the digital intermediate, or like nothing digital or something like that. The thing is, 90% of people will never see that.
Sadly.
I mean that's that's the strength of digital. That is the strength of digital, is that it can be replicated over and over and over and over again, and it's not going to degrade. With film, like, yeah, I mean, I remember sitting in the auditorium of the AFI, Laszlo Kovacs uh, uh, showing a clip from Paper Moon, and it was struck from the original camera negative. I mean, like, this is a, what, 50, 60-year-old movie at this point? And it looked fucking gorgeous. It looked fucking gorgeous. I mean, it was one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen on screen. And the thing is, like, yeah, it was struck from the original camera negative. Most people don't see shit that's made from the original camera negative. So, like, if you're working on a movie like Jurassic World, I mean, obviously that's going to get shipped out to, like, how many countless auditoriums? I mean, James Cameron talked about Titanic. That it was run so many times that some of the prints were literally breaking while they were running the show. John Schwartzman talks about Jurassic World, and like, hey, our tests were 35 millimeter anamorphic, projected 35 millimeter anamorphic. Everybody loved the 35 millimeter anamorphic. Yeah, of course, because that was from the original negative, or like one generation beyond the original negative. The great thing about digital is you can just scan the original negative and you can make it work. But on the flip side, we've got situations like, The Hateful Eight, or we've got Dunkirk, or Oppenheimer, where, like, realistically, the prints that we're going to be running are probably from either the original negative or something close to it. And that's going to be the best of the best of the best. And there's a reason why I was running Dunkirk in Georgia, and we had people coming from Florida and other neighboring states just to see it in that format. It's because it's better. It's just fundamentally freaking better.
It was terrible, and I'm definitely not gonna do it on Oppenheimer. I'm definitely not watching it on IMAX because when I went with Jason to Dunkirk, and it was terrible. The changing formats, the over pixelation, and like grain on the 7D versus the IMAX. It just really, really bothered me. But I think that's. I mean, you're making a good point overall about like this makes it a bigger deal, but it does kind of bring it all back around to what the movies are supposed to be, and this touches on the Peter Jackson, the 48 frames. It's supposed to be a little bit further out from reality. It's supposed to be a representation of reality, a dramatic representation. And whether it's 48 frames or the digital image that's 48 frame is definitely too close to reality. It's like a newscast or a sports uh, uh, cast,
Yeah.
and those things just look too real. They don't look dramatic. They don't look like the movies that we grew up on. And there is something about that film look that it's slightly blurry, more blurry, especially if it's not from the original negative, if it's gone through some processing, and if it's been run a few times, it's got some scratches on it. The scratches is the only thing that really bothered me on film projection. That's why I think digital projection is really the way to go. But I'm still all for shooting on film if you want to have the grain, you want to have the analog look. But I really think that the digital projection is just way more consistent and more easily controlled, even if you run the movie, like you said, 10,000 times. But yeah, it's I think that's why it's going to be the constant battle of like what movies are supposed to look like, or what. I mean, I just watched like the Top Gun Maverick, and I was like, this movie is way too sharp, and like I'm seeing pores in everybody's faces, and the depth of field is just out of control, soft, and I thought it was like Alexa 65, and then I saw it was shot on the Sony Venice, and it was like, oh, that's why it's not. It's like, it looks a bit too digital for an Alexa. And I was like, I was wondering what camera that was, if it was like a red with a big sensor, but I guess the Venice has like a big sensor. But yeah, it looks good. It looks like a movie. I accept it, but it's just a bit too sharp. Like they could have like softened the image a bit, add some grain, but people just don't do that nowadays to movies unless it's a very specific type of movie.
It just brings me back to what Ansel Adams said. That the negative is the orchestration, the print is the symphony. If you don't get the it comes back to what Stanley Kubrick wrote to that projectionist on Barry Lyndon, like giving specific notes about the lamp power and the temperature and everything like that. Like getting through all of those basic numbers. And I why the hell are we not doing that anymore? I mean, uh, it's rough. I mean, I, you, we're putting our blood, sweat, and tears into these movies. People are putting blood, sweat, and tears into these movies, and then I mean, the reality of digital projection is that you're going to get somebody who's maybe making minimum wage who doesn't even know how to restart the projector if something goes wrong. That's horrifying to me. I mean, I mean, with film, you're going to have somebody who at least knows piss and head from his sister's titty.
That's very graphic. To back up what Matt is saying, while I do think we're kind of going down a rabbit hole here.
Yeah.
When I was trained to be a projectionist, and I say that because back then, to run a 35 millimeter projector, you had to go through training. Like, they didn't just allow the managers to do it, which is what a lot of theaters do now. Like now, and by the way, let's also be real here. I wasn't like some adult either. I mean, I was 23 years old or something like that, but I was a manager at the theater, and I had to go through, I want to say, about a month or so of additional training from a very experienced projectionist that we had working there. And he trained me and one other guy at the same time, and we had to learn all sorts of stuff. And this guy's big thing that he just drilled into us over and over and over was presentation. That's what he talked about all the time. He talked about, if you're doing this with this machine and this thing goes wrong, something happens, you need to know how to assess the situation very quickly before it gets out of hand and potentially save the presentation for these people. He showed us how to spot all sorts of problems like horizontal scratches and vertical scratches on the film, what's causing them, how to keep it from happening, to the film prints to preserve them. When the movie starts, if you've screwed something up, how you can kind of like stop it real quick and get it going, without damaging the whole thing and having to give refunds to everybody out there. Sometimes even ways to do it where nobody even knows anything went wrong. There's just all sorts of things that when the sound would go out, how you can fix it and switch from, one sound to another, because there's like multiple sounds on the thing. There's like a DTS one, and then there's the sound strip, and there's like, it's just a bunch of little things. Anyway, point I'm getting at is they used to have to pay people. They would train people like me to be up there. And even in a tiny little auditorium, or tiny little theater like the one I worked in, which only had 6 auditoriums, you still had to have at least one person who knew what they were doing operating these insanely expensive projectors and these, handling these very expensive film prints so they didn't get destroyed. And that resulted naturally in better presentation. And Matt has talked at length over the many episodes we've had about all these little things that have gone downhill now, because now that they're all digital projection, they don't need anyone up there. It's so much of it is automated. They've just got some teenager up there who's making minimum wage, and most of the time it's like they don't even know what they're doing. They leave the 3D box down all the time, which ruins the presentation.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go on and on and on. I mean, it's sad, really, because it's not digital's fault. It's not like, this is just a byproduct of the system,
No, it's human nature.
Yeah.
It's human nature meeting technology.
And it's big companies. Here's the bottom line. It's big companies not caring about presentation, because you could spend more money and go to an ArcLight, and you can go to a Landmark where they're showing digital things as well. And you're not going to have those problems. You have those problems at places like Regal and AMC and Cinemark and these big chains where they are, scraping by and trying to, and to be perfectly honest, to some extent, it's not even their fault either, because they're just trying to, they're trying to keep their heads above water too. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget one of my worst experiences ever was at a Regal in the DC area, and my girlfriend at the time and I went to go see Anthropoid. It was a movie shot on 16 millimeter 2D. We went into the theater. They still had the house lights on, like the fluorescence and everything. And they had the 3D box on. and I yeah, we got through like a couple of trailers, and I was just like, "Fuck this!" I went down, asked for a manager, said like, you know, you still had the house lights on and you had the 3D box on, and the manager was like, "No, we didn't." Like, what the no, yeah, you did. I was just up there. I mean, I got the refund, but holy shit. I mean, that was just wrong on so many levels.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I mean, again, digital projection is not the culprit. It's the human reaction to digital projection that has created a massive problem. In that, like, yeah, yeah, I mean, they think that one minimum wage employee covering 18 auditoriums is entirely sufficient, and that employee should also be able to be called away to the concession stand, if it gets busy. Uh, and I mean, well, the thing that a lot of people don't understand or realize is that movie theaters were actually against the conversion to digital overall. It was actually the production companies that were uh, uh, pushing for the turn to digital, and I mean it makes sense because the production companies were making the prints, and the prints cost what, like 2,000
Lots of money.
a piece. Yeah, I mean IMAX prints cost like 40,000 a piece. So, uh,
Yeah, it's crazy, like, to make that money back. I mean, I'm sure they do, but still.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
It's
but
what's even more crazy is like Matt said about the not just striking a print from the negative, but also just once you've made that 35 millimeter film print and it goes to, let's just say, like a Regal theater or something like that, or a AMC theater or something like that. The sad part is it doesn't last that long. I mean, this thing that costs
Yeah.
thousands of dollars, it then gets sent to a second run theater. Like, if I don't know if every town has that, but a lot of them do. They've got the little discount theater, the Regency or whatever you're going to call it, depending on where you are, and they've got their little, what used to be like $5 theaters or something like that, $3 theaters, $2 matinees, the stuff like that used to be around all the time. Those are the movies that were, it's like they're almost out on DVD or they're already out on DVD. And it's the last run where you can go see it in these crummy little discount theaters. And it's like, by the time they get there, oh my gosh, they have been destroyed. Like it's you can't even see a movie in those theaters without seeing, or let's say back then you didn't used to be able to see a movie in those theaters without all sorts of scratches all over the print and stuff like that, and they've been chopped up. And a lot of people don't know that because of the platter system that Matt was talking about, and they don't do reel to reel anymore for very obvious reasons. Now every time a film print used to get delivered to a theater, it would be delivered in usually about 7 different cans. And so each can is about each reel is like about 15 minutes or so, 14 minutes, something like that, 17 minutes depending, I don't know. But the point is you have to splice the movie together into one big giant 3-foot diameter movie reel, and then put it on a big platter, and it feeds through the machine, and then collects it up on another platter. So when that theater's done, it has to get chopped up again, and there was tape all over it, and you usually lose a few frames and stuff like that everywhere where there was a splice or a cut. Every time something gets damaged, you have to cut that out. So by the time it gets to the second run theater, these things are chopped up. I mean, there's so much tape all over them; they're just disgusting. So.
If anybody is wondering why our podcast is called Cut and Splice,
There you go.
might,
yeah. Well, that and also just in the editing process for sure. That's how they used to edit, is to cut and splice. But I'm wondering how I'm gonna cut and splice this episode.
I know, I was wondering that too. I feel like
Jason was like worried, is like, I don't have much to say. And it's like we're over an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually kind of crazy because I mean, I've never been a projectionist on a 35 millimeter movie, so like when you're talking about a 35 millimeter print being, you know, like what a few feet in diameter and everything, I mean, I think Dunkirk, which is a pretty short movie, was like I think it was at least 4.5 feet.
Yeah, that's crazy.
In diameter,
especially when you consider a spooled object is exponentially longer the wider it gets. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Oppenheimer is probably going to be around 5.5 feet.
Yeah.
In diameter. So
obviously, Gil, you can cut this obviously, but this is the kind of thing that's so funny about like you know, when you've worked as a projectionist and then you see like do you remember in the show Entourage, do you remember when they get that what's that really cool guy who's the director, he's like the artistic director who they it's like Walsh or something like that, I think was his name. I can't remember, but anyway.
Yeah, I think I remember something, but
yeah, he's the one who they went to Sundance with, and he was like really successful with their little indie film that they made. And then then afterward they have this disastrous movie they make about Pablo Escobar or something like that, and they're like literally filming out in the jungle and stuff like that.
Medellin or whatever.
Medellin, yeah. So if you remember at the end of it, before they show how terrible the movie is, when they think it's like this masterpiece, that character, I want to say his name was Wall. I could be totally wrong. I don't remember. But anyway, that guy, the director, who's easily one of my favorite characters in the whole show, he gets all crazy because he's edited it himself, and he's in the old school way. He's cut and spliced the entire thing together into the movie, but then he refuses to allow anyone to see it, and so they're trying to get him, but he's got the film in an old aluminum film can, and he's got it tied with a rope around his neck so nobody can see it. And it's so funny because what the prop that they're using in the show for that scene is 1,000-foot long, you know, film can. Like, yes, it's a little longer. It's longer than a traditional film can. Yes, you could fit a little bit more room there, but that's like 40 minutes tops. You know, like I don't even know exactly how long the thing was, like only about 1.5 to 2 feet in diameter. There's no way that's a movie, especially not when they're considering that their movie was supposed to be an epic, like a, you know, a Apocalypse Now sized film, you know, like the thing, it takes like 2 people to lift that stuff. Like it is heavy.
Yeah. I you know,
movie magic,
like the Family Guy,
TV magic.
TV magic.
Yeah, I mean, like the Family Guy, you know, reboot after their first cancellation, you know, like the North by Northwest thing.
I love that episode.
Yeah, but you know, like you know, trying to hide the Passion of the Christ
Passion
2.
of the Christ 2. Oh, that was so funny from Mel Gibson.
I mean, yeah, that can maybe holds like 5 minutes of film.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 minutes.
That's
Uh,
crazy.